Let's start with today's case. Today, we're going to talk about another case from Australia. So many people ask me to take on more cases in Australia, and I already have a bunch of them planned. I also want to take on cases in New Zealand. You can leave a request or case that you'd like me to cover on my channel in the comments section below. You can follow me on Instagram, and I'm thinking about making a form that works like email or Google Docs. I'll put the link to it in my description below. I'm not sure yet, though. Tell me what you think. Tell me what easy thing you think it would be. Before we watch the video, I want to quickly warn you that it contains a lot of sexual assault. Now let's talk about the case. This talk will be about the Moorhouse murders that happened in Western Australia. They were done by David and Catherine Birnie, who are known for being serial killers. David Birnie was born in 1951, on February 16th. He was the oldest of John and Margaret Birnie's 5 children. He was born in a grove in Western Australia, about 13 kilometers from Perth. By the way, I was born and raised there. I don't think I made that clear enough. When he was young, his family life was very unstable. Many people said that the family was broken and full of alcoholics and promiscuous people. There were also many rumors that there was incest in the family. People said the house was really gross and dirty, and they said John and Margaret never cooked for the kids. The family never eats together. The kids were forced to eat anything they could find in the fridge. I remember seeing this and thinking, you won't have a chance with that. There was a lot of shame surrounding the burnings. You know, both of my parents don't work well together. The house was always dirty. Not every day did they eat. The kids and dogs could go to the fridge whenever they were hungry because the door was always left ajar. John was like this person. Something was wrong with his spine, which made him look really weird and small. Besides that, not much is known about him other than the fact that he didn't like or talk to people outside of his family. He was also known to go to a nearby Baptist church. That's all I could find out about him. He stood out from the others. He was really small. He had a humpback. He was unable to talk. You would give up trying to talk to him because he got off to such a bad start. In fact, most people did just that. From what I've read, David's mom, Margaret, was a real doll. People said she was dirty and messy and an alcoholic. It sounded like her voice showed that she smoked a lot. It was also known that she would do sexual things for taxi rides. Instead of giving her money for taxi rides, on one occasion, she was on the bus with one of her kids, who was younger. She gave the crying baby to a stranger on the bus, then sat down in a different part of the bus, shot back, smoked a cigarette, and read a book. She didn't care about the crying baby or the person she had given it to until the bus got to her stop. She got off at her stop when she went to get the baby back. She would also hit her kids with a broom if they did something wrong. She was known to scream and yell at her kids a lot. She thought the older kids would take care of the younger ones, but they were taken away from her a lot. It seemed like these kids were in and out of foster care their whole childhood. I'm sure you can imagine that all of this had a pretty big impact on David as he grew up. By the time he was 8, he was breaking the law by stealing small things and breaking into homes while going to Sunday school at the Baptist church where his father went. His teachers saw that he was acting really mean. It looked like he was drawing creepy things, and it was pretty clear that he had serious mental problems from a very young age. When I was 16, I started teaching Sunday school. My first class was made up of little 3-year-olds, and David Birnie was one of them. He had also hit the crayons or pencils hard while making tools out of paper. I remember thinking, this isn't right. This kid is mean in a way that the other kids weren't. And in the early 1960s, David was 12 years old when his family moved to Perth. It was there that he met Catherine Harrison, who lived next door. Catherine was only 3 years old when she was born on May 23, 1951. She was also 12 years old. Doreen, her mother, died while giving birth to her younger brother. 2 days later, her younger brother also died. Kate and her dad Harold then moved to South Africa, but things did not go well. He had a hard time taking care of Catherine by himself, so she ended up going back to Perth to live with her maternal grandparents. It was very lonely growing up with her grandparents because they didn't let any other kids into the house. In any case, no kids were allowed to play with her because no parent at a school wanted their kids to be around her. They thought she was strange and that something was wrong with her. This was made even worse by the fact that she had a very rocky relationship with her father as a child. He seemed to want her 1 minute, not want her the next, and then want her again. She was sent to different relatives more than once. I can only imagine how lonely her childhood must have been, and how she would have been looking for love or approval because everyone kept passing her off to someone else. Harold, her father, told her he did want her back when she was 10 years old. He ended up getting full custody because he and her maternal grandparents couldn't agree on who should have custody. So, she met David Birnie when she was 12 and living with her dad in Perth. As I said, she was very lonely and desperate for some kind of human interaction or love, and David was interested in her, so they hit it off right away. Not long after this third one, David's parents got a divorce. Neither of them claimed him, so the state took him in. They stopped talking to each other. David dropped out of school when he was 15 and went to work as an apprentice jockey for Eric Parnham at Ascot races. Another well-known first step for serial killers is to hunt animals. Okay, in fact, David hurt 3 horses while he was working at the racetrack. After that, there was the case with the 70-year-old woman. He broke into her apartment while wearing nothing but a stocking on his head. He also tried to sexually assault her, but he lost it and ran away before anything bad could happen. But it got him fired. After that, he didn't have a personality and never had a small, hard face. Had a dark, always sharp, and cocky face. He was a really bad person. It was him riding by on his bike. He was wearing a long black jacket and had not let go of the handlebars. He had also decided to jack it up. He rode along with no clothes on his shoulders. Thrown object. That's all. He's scared. But we always ask, what's wrong with him? That happened in the same year that David and Catherine met, in 1966. They got back together with an old flame right away and fell in love. David had already been found guilty of many crimes by this point. He was found guilty of robbery, theft, and assault. He was also hooked on sex and porn. He went to and from prison often and was glad to have a partner in crime. At first, they did smaller crimes. The first time they were caught was on June 11, 1969. They were charged with 11 counts of theft and breaking and entering. They both admitted guilt. David got 9 months in prison, but Catherine was pregnant with someone else's child at the time, so they were given probation instead. The next month, they went to court and were charged with 8 more counts of theft. This added 3 years to David's sentence and something like 4 years to Catherine's probation. David actually got out of jail on June 21, 1970, which was my birthday. He went and saw Catherine again. Along with each other, they went on a cute little crime spree. Several goals. They stole things and broke into homes several times before they were caught on July 10, 1970. They were charged with 53 counts of trespassing, burglary, and illegal operation of a motor vehicle. When they were caught, they had wigs, radios, and other types of dynamite and detonators on them. They were so lucky not to use them, because this time things could have gone a lot worse. David was sent to prison for 2.5 years, and Catherine was sent to prison for 6 months, which is where she had the baby. And the baby was taken away from her right away while she was in jail. During their relationship, Catherine's dad Harold begged her many times to break up with David because they were always getting into trouble together. All of these crimes showed that she was going in a very bad direction. He also cared about her. But this only made Catherine want David more. She was crazy about him. She said she knew what she did was wrong, but she would have done anything for David while she was in jail for 6 months. The fact that she couldn't talk to David gave her time to think about what she had done, how her life with David was going, and what she wanted her life to be like. She was given back custody of her baby when she got out of prison, and her parole officer told her to stay away from David and find work as a nanny. She also went to Fremantle for the McLachlan family. She ended up getting together with their youngest son, Daniel McLachlan, and had a baby with him. In the end, they got married on her 21st birthday, and their son Donnie Jr. was born in November. After only 7 months, their friends came over, and Donnie Jr. hung out with them on the driveway as a friend. Then they left. They killed Donnie, who was 7 months old, by running over him. Catherine and Donald did help each other through it, though, and they went on to have 6 more children together. Don worked for the city council, and even though he was tired, they always got through it. At least they were pretty content until Donald hurt his back and couldn't go to work. They had to live in public housing, which was not fun at all. They were very close to being poor. It was always dirty and unkempt, and their kids would do whatever they pleased while running around. It was a really bad time. At the same time, David settled down after his 2.5-year prison sentence was over. He got married to Carrie and had a daughter named Tanya with her. In 1974, David Birnie met Carrie through his brother. How quickly things moved along, very, very, very quickly. He asked me to marry him at the movies the next night. That night, I told you yes. He was a kind and loving man, and I've never been able to understand how the person I knew could be such a psychopath. I knew the father, and there was also David Birnie, a sick person. Before David hurt his head, we had a pretty good, normal life for the next 6 years. And he seems to have changed so much as a person. Carrie, his wife, said she knew right away when he started treating her badly. He began having a lot of affairs, which Carrie pretended she wasn't aware of as a parent. David Birnie cared about his daughter, but as a husband, he gave in to his desires and looked for sex outside of marriage, even though his wife later found ads for it. After being married for 10 years, David brought home his 16-year-old girlfriend. His daughter Tanya had to move out of her room so that he and his girlfriend of 16 years could live there. Very badly messed up. It was the very last thing that Carrie could take. She left David around the same time that Carrie did, in 1984. At the time, she took Tanya and lived with Donald in Victoria Park, where they were almost poor. It had been 4 weeks since she had her youngest child. She chose to have a hysterectomy at the hospital. It seems like David found her, even though a lot of people thought they had been talking and seeing each other for 2 years while her life was getting worse. The place where she lived was very poor. Her husband wasn't able to work. David's life was also getting worse after he hurt his head. As a result, some people thought they had been talking for 2 years before they finally met again. In short, Donald goes to see his wife after she has had a hysterectomy. When David walks into the room, Birnie is there with her hand in his. Her next move was to go see David after she got out of the hospital. She called Donald while she was there. She told him, "I'm leaving you and the kids." Catherine and Celia then moved in with David at 3 Moorhouse Street, along with Willagee and Kath. Catherine legally changed her last name to Birnie, even though they never got married. They also got 2 dogs together. Also, I feel bad for the dogs. There is no choice for them to be barren, though. Imagine that you are a dog and the most infamous and disgusting serial killers bought you dogs to pay for this life. Even though we don't deserve them. David was still going to and from prison after they broke up. While he was there, he got back in touch with his younger brother James because they shared a cell. A lot of Birnie kids lost touch with each other when their parents split up and they moved to the state right away. And James was in jail because he raped his 6-year-old niece, whom he says led him to her. So, the right people, the Barneys. In December 1984, James moved in with David and Catherine at their house on Moorhouse Street. He later said in interviews that David had such a huge collection of pornographic material that he was hooked on sex and had to have sex 5 or 6 times a day. It looks like David would like to put this painkiller into his drawing. "I don't want to lose my money so that he can keep having sex longer without ending." James told them that he slept on the couch while he was there, and that David had a small mattress that he had to wrap around the couch and have sex with girls right next to his brother. David and Catherine took some time off in December 1984. During that free time, David made his younger brother have sex with him against his will. Some news stories said he was awake and David made him do it. After reading that, I learned that James was asleep when David raped his brother. And I think that James and David continued to sleep together for another 2 years after that. James turned 21 in 1986. For his birthday, David gave him the chance to have sex with Catherine. It was the first time he'd ever had sex with a woman. At that point, I think he may have only slept with David. So that's some background on the Bunnies and who they were. The events that led to the terrible crimes they did. This is what we're going to talk about now. The crimes they were later found guilty of. There are rumors that they have been involved in more crimes than the ones they were found guilty of. But we'll talk about them after the video briefly. In 1985, David started to bother a woman named Audrey Schofield. She worked as a receptionist for a small real estate company in the area for about a week. He would just walk up to the real estate office and stare at her. He could see them all through the open doors and sit on the bench outside the door. On this particular day, I saw a small man sit down there. It turned out to be David Birnie. His goal was to get me to leave the office for any reason, so he could take me with him every day for 7 days. But when he came back, He would stand outside and wait until Audrey was alone while he pestered her with the same list to wear it down. At that point, he would come in and say all sorts of strange things to her. He had brown eyes and dark hair. He even tried to get her to leave with him and go back to her house one time. It made sense that she was very uncomfortable with him and what he was doing. That's when she called her husband, who showed up like he did every day. When her husband saw her, he told her to fuck off. After that, David never came back. And this was the first known, proven step between small thefts and break-ins and murders and assaults. David and Catherine went from committing small crimes to murder on October 6, 1986. The first person they killed was Mary Nielsen. She was 22 years old and studied psychology at the University of Western Australia. She wanted to work for the Department of Community Welfare as a counselor. After she finished school, some of her money for college came from working part-time at a nearby deli. On October 6th, her parents, who were both TAFE lecturers, were on vacation in the UK. That night, she had classes at university, but she had the day off, so she did some things and got her tires changed. Her student was one of a kind. They were not with her. She wanted to save money, so she went to a nearby auto body shop where David Birnie worked. David was always a good guy. He got to work on time. He never called in sick. It happened that he got paid too much one week, and he was honest enough to give it back. And I felt so at ease that if he had asked me to join him for a drink or a cup of coffee to catch up, I would have certainly done so. When he was done showing her all the ties, he told her, "You know, I have some really good ones back at my house that I can make for less money if you want to come meet me later." She wanted to save money and it was only 5 minutes away, so she thought that was a great idea. He told her to come by around 5 p.m. after giving her the address, which she did. When she got to 3 Moorhouse Street, she knocked on the door. David answered, grabbed her, held her with a knife, and dragged her into the bedroom, where he tied her to the bed with a gaffer tape. David then raped Mary several times while Catherine sat on the sidelines and watched, cheering him on, taking notes, and asking him what he liked about it and what turned him on in order to do research. She was the main person who planned the whole thing. Like, for a whole year before they took Mary, she looked into how to kill someone, how to get away with it, and when and where to park her car to make it look less suspicious. What did she say David could do? Girls? They were unable to take the child. She would tell him, "Okay, you can get that one," when they went out together. They also had a phrase that meant, "I've got the munchies." "I've got the munchies," she would say, if she saw a girl she liked. David would say, "I've got the munchies too," if he liked her too. That's how they would pick who to kidnap. She would also write things down and take pictures, while David was beating these women up. Last but not least, David and Catherine took Mary in their car that night and drove 54 kilometers to Gleneagles National Park. David raped Mary again when they got to the park. Then he got a rope from the car and choked her. Afterward, he made a small grave and threw Mary's body into it. He then stabbed her in the chest to make sure she was dead and buried her. After that, they took Mary's car and parked it near a police station. In fact, she did what I said she would do and Googled where to park a car. When should you move the car? Things like that. The police didn't find Mary's car for 6 days either. It was said that Mary was missing after the murder, but nothing came of it. The truth is that there was no investigation. There were no eyes on the bodies at all. Because of this, after 2 weeks, they thought they were safe and were ready to launch another attack. They began driving around to find the next victim. They went around the Canning Highway and the Stirling Highway. In a newspaper ad, they said, urgently seeking a lonely young person, preferably a woman between the ages of 18 and 24, to share a single-bedroom flat. The question is whether anyone answered the ad in the paper. Sure, I wouldn't. It's silly to think that someone would look at that and say, "Yeah, but we're looking for a lonely young person to move in with us." This ad is not at all creepy. Anyway, it didn't matter if anyone responded or not. That way they didn't get any victims. On October 20th, 1986, 2 weeks after Mary's man's death, they were still driving around looking for the next victim, just like they had been for 2 weeks. They knew they would do that little card where Catherine would say, "I've got the munchies." David would say, "Darling, I've got the munchies too," if he was interested. And they didn't really have a certain kind. There wasn't a certain age. They were looking for nurse-specific traits. It was only when they saw a woman on the street who looked weak that they would do it. Of course, it had to be a woman. In Claremont, they drove past Susanna Candy, who was hitchhiking along the Sterling Highway on the night of the 20th. They both agreed that she would be their next victim. She was only 15 years old. She was called a young girl with a free spirit. She went to Hollywood High School in Perth Shenton Park and was said to work hard there. She lived at home with her parents and one sister, two brothers, and her parents. Dr. Douglas Candy was her father, and he was a well-known and respected eye doctor at St. John of God Hospital. He looked out for his daughters a lot, and when Susanna got a job at a nearby restaurant and had to work late, he would walk there, meet her outside, and then walk her home. She was walking that night, but her dad wasn't there to pick her up when she got home from work. In order to get home, she put out her thumb and tried to catch a ride. David and Catherine then pulled up and offered to take her somewhere. "Thank you, Catherine. They looked pretty safe. It was a couple, you know? It wasn't just an odd old man. They were not as safe as they looked, unfortunately." They tied Susanna up and put a knife to her throat as soon as she got in the car. As they did with Mary, they took her back to the house, put her in the bedroom, gagged her, and tied her to the bed. David then raped her several times while Catherine watched and took notes and pictures. David was unhappy with how quickly they killed Mary, so he wanted to make the process last a little longer. They had Susanna write letters to her family and friends to let them know she was okay and that she and some friends had gone to Queensland. She was having fun. Do not worry. They also had her call her parents and read from a script that Catherine had written. This was done to try to dispel any suspicions that something was wrong, but it worked the opposite way for a few days. David and raped her many times while they had her in jail. They had Catherine with them a few times this time as well. When they were finally done with her, David tried to choke her, but she put up such a good fight that he couldn't. So instead, they gave her sleeping pills against her will. Then, after she passed out, David got the rope he gave Catherine. To show that you love him, he told her to choke her. Not a single question asked. She did it, Catherine. She wrapped the rope around Susanna's neck and held on tight until she stopped breathing. They put her body back in that car and drove her to Gleneagles Forest, where she was buried next to Mary's. As I already said, the letters and calls made her parents even more suspicious. The Birnings didn't get the results they were hoping for at all. They went to the police station as soon as I got the letters. The police looked at them and said, "Look, something is wrong. She's 15 years old. Something is wrong." The police said, "Hey, you have these notes. It looks like she ran off." "I'm sorry about that." On November 1st, just 11 days after Susanna's case, the bodies found their next victim. In 1986, Nolene Patterson, who was 31 years old at the time, worked as the bar manager at the Nedlands Golf Club in Bicton. This was just under 10 minutes before the fire. Willagee was on her way home when she ran out of gas and had to stop. David and Catherine then pulled up next to her and offered to drive her to the nearest gas station. Again, they look like they are doing nothing wrong by acting this way. Two middle-aged people, not a creepy man. Nolene felt better right away because she had just stopped her car on the side of the road and gotten in. They put a knife to her throat and took her back to their house as soon as she got in the car. As they did with the other victims, they put her on the bed, gagged her, and David raped her over and over again. That attack was a little different because Nolene was kind of going along with it. She was acting like she liked it. In order to stay alive, she tried to get close to David. The fact that David was becoming emotionally attached to her made Catherine crazy jealous. She was sure that Nolene would get in the way of them getting together. She also tried to insult Nolene at one point, but David stopped her. David kept raping Nolene and putting off taking care of the situation for 3 days. Finally, Catherine came in with a knife to her throat and said, "Either you kill her or I will kill myself." I gave him a very tense choice. So David choked her again and then pushed a bunch of sleeping pills down her throat. She was buried in Gleneagles Forest, kind of in the same area as other girls, but a little farther away. Her body was put in that car afterwards, and it looks like they were going to bury her the whole time they were driving her there and taking her to the spot. Catherine was calling her names. She was calling her names and being mean. And when they buried her, she was like throwing the dart in her face because she knew 3 days before that she had killed someone. These attacks are coming together more and more quickly. The next person the bodies found was Denise Brown, who was 21 years old. It was November 4th, 1986. People said that Denise was a sweet, friendly, and loving girl. In Netherlands, she lived with her boyfriend in a house that the two of them shared. She had a part-time job as a computer operator and liked going to parties. Her favorite things to do were dancing and going to clubs. On the night of the 4th, when she was ready to go home after going to a club, she left the club and waited for a bus near Stirling Highway in Fremantle, which is about 30 minutes south of Perth. Before the bus arrived, David and Catherine Birnie pulled up and offered her a ride, which she accepted when she got in. They drove her back to their house with a knife to her throat, just like they did with the other people they had hurt. Afterwards, they tied her to the bed, gagged her, and raped her over and over again by David for 2 days. They also beat her up and made her call her family and friends to let them know she was okay, just like Susanna. But when Denise's boyfriend and roommate heard about the call, they thought something was wrong. Most of the time, Denise brings up the flat when she is going to stay with friends overnight or for a little while longer. She was still alive. It wasn't her at all. It's not kind of me. Then, on November 6th, they made her take a lot of sleeping pills. They put her in their car and drove her somewhere different from where they took their other victims when she fell asleep. They took her 60 kilometers away to one of her pine plantations. When they got there, it was still light outside. David then raped her in the car. After it got dark, he raped her outside the car and stabbed her in the neck, then dug a small grave and put her body in it. However, as they began to bury her, she woke up and began struggling for. David had no idea what to do. He took out his shovel. Even though he hit her in the head, she was still alive and trying to breathe. He then got an axe and hit her in the head with it. She was killed 3 times with the axe. At this point, the news is starting to pay some attention to the situation. And the news kind of talked about the idea that they might be linked, but it wasn't big news or anything. Because of the letters, calls, and other signs, the police and people in the media thought the girls had run away. The police didn't think there was any chance that they were linked. After 3 days, on November 9th, David and Catherine Birnie found their next victim. Her name was Kate Moyer, and she was 17. When I wasn't going to high school, my parents told me, "What's the point of going to school anymore?" To pay for my living, I worked 60 hours a week. At that time, I worked full-time at a store called Cherry Lion. She went to a pub and a concert with her friends after going to a club. After that, she went to the Claremont Hotel to see La Villazin. She had a good night. Around 10:30 p.m., her band friends offered to drive her home because she was pretty drunk. She told them, "It's okay. Leave me at the street corner, and I'll walk the rest of the way." She was pretty young. "Oh, I'll just get sober on my walk," she thought. She was walking alone on the Stirling Highway, only 3 minutes from where Susanna Akinyi was taken. She saw a car coming slowly enough that she could put out her hand and try to catch a ride. Kate and David pulled up next to her. They asked her where she lived and if she needed a ride home, which she agreed to. At first, everything seemed fine when she got in the car. If she tried to leave her house when they got there, she saw that no one was there to answer the door. She said, "Hey, that's not my door handle." They said, "Hey, try using the window handle." She looked, but there was no window handle. She asked, "Okay, what's going on?" David then grabbed her, pushed her head between the front seats, and held a butcher's knife to her neck while he got one from his boots. Then they took her to the lookout, which is 600 meters away. Catherine steps out of the car and into the bird, where she gets a blanket and some cable ties and zip ties. She then gets back into the passenger seat and tells Kate, "Give me your hands." Kate tells her to lie down in the back seat and puts the blanket over her. She then puts her hands out and wraps the cable ties around her arms. She was then taken to the house on Moorhouse Street. On the way there, Kate asked from under the blanket, "Are you going to rape or kill me?" The girls replied, "We'll only rape you if you're a good girl." When they got to her house, they cut off her cable ties and told her to take off everything but her underwear and soul. After that, they put her clothes, jewelry, and other personal items in a small plastic bag that had her name written on it. It wasn't like a bag that was already written. They knew they were going to get her because all of those attacks were planned ahead of time. They didn't really go after specific people. She was then forced to take a shower while Catherine watched. After that, she was taken into the living room and asked her a bunch of questions. What was her birthday, if she was on the pill, and if she had a boyfriend. They asked her full name and address. After they were done asking her questions, They watched the movie Rambo or smoked cigarettes while listening to Dire Straits. Kate tried to get them really high while they smoked weed together. David and Catherine talked about people who had been hurt in the past. They were having fun with it. And there was a newspaper on the table with a picture of Denise Brown on it. And Catherine looked at it and laughed a little. Kay asked, "What's funny?" To which Catherine replied, "You'd think a big girl like that could take care of herself?" Kate knew right away that she was one of the other victims and that she was probably going to die that night because it was just a picture of her face. The picture didn't show if she was a big girl or not. Kate was sure she was going to die, and she decided to leave clues so that when the police caught the bad guys, they would know she was one of their victims. So she put a lipstick under a couch. David and Catherine left the room for a moment, and there was a hole in the roof. So she put a pack of cigarettes up there. Around 12:30 a.m., she also left her friend's driver's license there. David raped her in the bedroom while Catherine watched and wrote down what he did. It smelled awful. It was disgusting to see them rape. He kissed me. I don't think you could even think of that. Okay, it wasn't rough. Yes, it was. It had kisses, hugs, and everything else. He kissed me. After the attack, Kate watched as they made her shower again. They tied her to the bed with chains. They gave her a pen and paper so she could write her friends and family goodbye. David left the room at one point, and Kate chose to scream. To get out of this situation, she wanted to do everything she could. She hoped that her neighbors would hear her and come over to help her. David rushed into the room right away and raped her again. He then chained or cuffed himself to her and tried to make her take sleeping pills. She didn't follow them, though. It took her until he went to sleep to find them all. The next morning, she had to call her parents to let them know she was okay. She stayed with a friend because she was too drunk to drive home. After that, David ate breakfast like it was any other day and went to work like a woman wasn't being held hostage at his house. And after he left, Kate felt a lot better and up for a chance. She thought she had an equal chance of getting Eva. Because it was just her and Catherine, she was either going to be killed or be able to get away. She chose to try to become friends with Catherine. She began to listen to the same Dire Straits album that they had listened to the night before while they talked about it and the movie they had seen together. They went out to the back at one point to smoke together. Catherine actually took Kate's chains off. Catherine was making some extra money by selling weed, and someone must have come to the door to buy some. She told Kate, "Hey, go to the bedroom." Kate then went to the bedroom and saw this as her chance. She used to Winder jumped out of that window and began running right away. She ran down the street. There were 4 doors she knocked on, but no one answered. She had to run until she got to a nearby shopping center. She then went into the grocery store and started crying. The store owner then called the police. Soon after, police showed up and drove her to the station to take a statement. And they didn't really believe her at first. They thought she was crazy and making everything up. In the end, they brought in Laura Hancock, who was 22 years old. It was said that it was a strange story and that this was a fake report, and I need to think about that. That wasn't a suggestion of making up evidence. It was a case of that doesn't seem to be true. Be sure to look at this through those lenses. She had just graduated from the academy a few months before, so she knew Kate well and was the only one who believed her. She told the same story over and over. There was a lot of information she remembered about the people who had taken her, even though they had used fake names. They told her their names were John and Margaret. However, she paid attention to many details while she was at the house. She knew where it was and what it looked like, as if she were sorry. "Could I show you something? This is the statement you gave Kate. Since then, have you seen it?" Every link in the chain was about an inch long, and each chain was about 1.5 meters long. But he held me in place, so I was lying on my back on the bed, straight out. Since each padlock and key had a number, Laura kept asking her boss about it. She tells him, "You have to believe this girl and see what she says. She can't be telling the truth. She is always the same and has a lot of information." It was at that point that detectives Paul Ferguson and Vince Caddick went to the corner of 3rd and Moorhouse Street. At the same time that Kate got away, Catherine was going crazy. David told a coworker, "Hey, my dogs got out. I've got a guard," after she called him. He then left. He came back after that. I thought everything was fine when he got back because he was acting so normal. That's why no one is home when the police arrive. They choose to wait for someone to come home by sitting out front. Catherine does get home in the end. They go up to her. They did what the search warrant said they would do after she got very angry with them. As soon as I walked into the house, I knew something was wrong because the fireplace had just been lit, which wouldn't happen in November in Perth. If you used a fireplace to heat your home, it would be very hot. So it was clear that they had used it to do something like burn evidence. They first knew that this girl wasn't lying because of that. It was a big red flag. The cigars, Kate's friend's driver's license, and the lipstick were all found when they looked around the house. So, they found a lot of other things that supported her story. For example, they found a pill bottle that had the name and brand of the drug written on it, which I already said was very detailed. The movie was there. She remembered the movie they were watching. It was a big movie. It was Jacob. I remember what they were called. I missed the days when I could get a good movie at Blockbuster. Thoughts. She told them about the locks and the numbers that were on them. She had thought about and remembered all of these little things about the house because she was so smart. It's hard for me to imagine having to think about all of this. You know, it's hard for me to imagine how you would act in that situation. For example, I can't picture myself remembering all of these little details to back up my story and planting little pieces of evidence. It was really brave of her. When all of this evidence was put together to back up Catherine's story, they arrested her right away. They then went to David's workplace and arrested him there too. At the station, they kept them apart and questioned them for hours. They both told different stories. For example, Catherine said, "I have no idea who this girl is. I have never heard of her, met her, or seen her at the house." What David meant was that she did come over to smoke weed with us. After that, she had sex with me on her own terms. Detective Cottage finally told David, "Okay, let's go get some shovels, dig up some shallow graves, and get this over with." This was after interviewing David and Catherine for hours and hours. It was just a weird comment. You don't think that would be that, gotcha moment. However, David replied, "Okay, that's 4 of them." After that, he began to cry. Detectives asked David for the names of the 4 women who had been killed. He gave them all of their names and agreed to take them to the places where the women had been buried. Later, after the police told Catherine about David's confession, she began talking to Sir Detective Straub, David, and Catherine on separate calls. The first call was to the One True Pine Plantation, where David led them about 400 meters into the forest to where they had buried Denise Brown. After that, they drove them to Gleneagles Park, where David led the police down a narrow path through the forest. The grave of Mary Nielsen was then about 40 meters from the track. To get to where Susan Kearney was born, they kept going along the same path for another kilometer. Then Catherine wanted to show them where Nolene Patterson was buried. It was in the hallway that she told someone how much she hated Nolene and how glad she was that she was dead. She then spat on her grave when they got to the graveyard. The bodies went to court on November 12, 1986, and were charged with 4 counts of murder. Because there were so many people, they had to be brought into court under Clark's. They didn't like these people and wanted to hang them. That makes sense. They were also very proud. It looked like they didn't care. David kissed the angry crowds, and Catherine looked like she was smirking. That was really, really gross. The rage and the mind. You'll keep your bloody goal. You got a lot of love. Kill yourself. I don't touch your body. I think that neither David nor Catherine entered a plea at the hearing, and they were not given bail. The next hearing was on February 10, 1987, and an even bigger group of angry people showed up. David and both pleaded guilty at this hearing to 4 counts of murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of rape on March 3rd. In 1987, they were given 4 life sentences that they had to serve at the same time. But at the same time, it was written on their file that they would never be freed. David began his sentence at Fremantle Prison. When that prison closed in 1991, he was moved to Caterina Prison. And thankfully, other prisoners beat him up a lot in prison. Because of this, he was often put in solitary confinement for his own safety. David and Catherine wrote each other 2,600 letters while they were in prison. In the early 1990s, David began to try to work out a deal with the authorities so that he could see Catherine. In July 1992, he said that he and Catherine had done other things together and that he wanted to see Catherine. It would be best for everyone if he could see Catherine before telling them, but he had to do it anyway. The police then tried to talk to Catherine, but she didn't want to arm it. It was the last time she talked to David, and she had no plans to see him again. Didn't want letters or calls. She didn't want to be around him. Then when the police told David this, he said, "Well, if you can't offer me anything, I'm not going to tell you until I see Catherine." They drove around Perth for about 5 hours anyway, but he didn't tell them anything. There was no more communication between David and Catherine, but David kept writing her letters even though she never replied. He only stopped a few months before he killed himself by hanging himself in his cell on October 7, 2005. No one claimed him. The state government buried him in a porpoise grave after he died. When he died, he was being investigated for hitting another prisoner. This prisoner is known as PETA, and he said that David and another prisoner named Adrian Barrett, who had been convicted of child sex crimes, had raped him in 1999 when he was 23 years old. He was also given $70,000 as compensation for the assault. Kate Bonney is still locked up. Van Dyke was locked up in a women's prison, and it seems that other prisoners attacked her when she was first brought there. During the first year she was locked up, she talked to David and tried to write to her kids, and a letter she sent in 1987. I'll read it to you. She told him, "You should know by now that I'm being charged with murder and other crimes. Try to figure out what I did. No one was ever meant to get hurt. I did what I did, though, because I love David. Love has a lot of power. Plus, I learned that it can make you do things you doubt yourself to do. Those things happened and kept happening because I loved David. Be careful about who you love and how much you love them." She wrote that she would always love David and told them, "Please don't be ashamed of me because I already feel ashamed enough for all of us," which like a lot of people liked. In charge of the whole thing was she. She was the one who picked the women they beat up. It was her job to do research for a whole year before they took Mary Nielsen. For example, she said that she did research for a year. If you're going to say that, then just take responsibility for what you did. Anyway, she stopped talking to David in the early 1990s, which is why he started making deals with the police like, "Hey, I'll tell you about some other murders we did, if I can see her." They asked her why she stopped talking to him, and she said it was because he was weak and she was stronger than him and didn't need him anymore. Then, when the police tried to question her about the other crimes they had committed, she hit them. Now Catherine is in charge of the library at Bonda Prison. Also, she seems to have written letters to other famous serial killers like Moira Hindley and Eileen before she died because she was so known for killing people. And after her husband Donald died in 2000, she asked for permission to go to his funeral, but she was turned down. Catherine left her son Peter when he was 6 years old, and now he seems to have been beaten just for being her son. He said it broke his heart to know that his mother was a serial killer and that he wished she had been put to death. However, the death penalty had been taken away not long before they were found guilty. He said he would party for a whole week after she died. He told them to hurry up and die when they asked him what he wanted to say to his mother. The house on 3 Moorhouse Street that was on fire had been empty for 12 years. Since 1998, more than 12 different people have owned the house. It was recently completely redone and sold for $425,000 in June 2020. Let me tell you about the times when living in that house made me feel so unhappy. No matter how much I tore it down, I would still not want to live in a place where that happened. So, I already talked about other people who might be hurt off the banister. I'm only going to quickly go over them. 3 other possible victims of the Barnies have been named in public. The first is a girl named Lisa Moore. Her family took her from a small town called Cully, which I know very well. Many years ago, when my mom was a child, she lived there. That's where my dad used to live, so I've been there a million times. And it's really the same as this tiny town in the country. At the time, David was walking about 20 to 30 minutes away in a place called Bungaree. I know this place very well because my grandparents used to live there, and I've been there a million times. Also, it's just another small town in the country in Western Australia, about 2 hours from Perth. This one is really close to home. Sadly, though, the case has still not been solved. In other words, Lisa stopped being with Collie on October 30th, 1980. It had been 6 years since any of the confirmed cases of the bodies. At 8:30 p.m., she was last seen. I was on Collie's Main Street, waiting for a family friend to pick me up so I could go to a basketball game. At this point, she was seen getting into a yellow panel van. As I already said, David was working as a crane driver in Bunbury, which is about 20 to 30 minutes away from Collie. There, he drove a similar colored panel. It's clear that this happened a few years before the crimes, and Lisa is also much younger than the other victims. That time, he was married to Carrie, but as we all know, they broke up because he hurt a 16-year-old girl he said was his girlfriend. In other words, he doesn't care about age because his youngest victim was only 15 years old. He slept with a 16-year-old girl and tried to sexually assault a 17-year-old girl. After many years, his wife at the time, Carrie, did give him an alibi. She said he was working in the garage all day, so he couldn't have done it. Cheryl Renwick is the name of the second victim who has been named in public. She disappeared in May 1986, just 5 months before the Birnies' first official victim. She was 33 years old and had 2 children. She had also been dealing with a couple that had been following her around, and the woman and the couple had been to their house several times. Michelle and Kylie, Cheryl's daughters, both said that this woman looked just like pictures of Catherine. But Cheryl had to move because the stalking was so bad. But these 2 people found out where she had moved. They would call her all the time at home. They called her every day until she disappeared in May. When the police were looking for evidence against the bodies after all of their official crimes, they found something that looked like a long-sleeved, round-neck t-shirt that Michelle said belonged to her mother. She was sure of it because she often borrowed money from her. We found a top with a round neck and long sleeves. It was mine, but my mom used to borrow it, and it had the same logo as my mom's car, which I think is a huge coincidence. If it wasn't for the bodies, the body of Cheryl has never been found. It's too bad that there isn't much solid evidence in the case. Later, her car was found at the airport, which makes me think of how the bodies were dumped near the police station near Mary Nielsen's car. This is especially true since Catherine Birnie did research on this topic, looking into things like where lead cars go and how long it should be before a car is found. The tires were covered in sand, and the bodies were buried in places where sand was known to be present. There was no evidence found inside the car. As I already said, there's no solid evidence linking the Birnies to her death. The last woman named in public as a possible victim was Barbara Weston. She was a mother of 2 who was 38 years old. The last time anyone saw her was leaving a bar in Perth on June 27, 1986. Later, her body was found. The person who killed her had taken all of her jewelry and personal belongings and buried them next to her body, which, is one of the bodies. David was driven by Maurice detective Vince Caddick to the spot where Barbara's body was found on that drive around Perth. David didn't say anything, though. With that, I've told you everything I know about this case. Please tell me what you think about possible victims in the comments section below. If you have any ideas for future cases, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. If the bodies were involved, please leave them there. Hey everyone, have a great rest of the day, and I hope to see you in my next video. Goodbye, guys.